I've come today to Bonehill Mill Fishery near Tamworth, near Birmingham, to do a spot of shallow fishing, just trying out the new Drennan In-Line Crystal Dibbers. Now last year we brought out the normal Crystal Dibbers that were a real hit. There were a lot of records and a lot of competitions won using these type of floats. The clear plastic dibbers were a real hit. Now to progress on from there, what we've done, we've actually produced another crystal dibber, but an inline one. It's a little carp. And if I just clip this rig up and just show you what I'm actually using today. These inline dibbers are slightly different to the original ones that we produced. The original ones had a side eye and the plastic see-through top with the yellow paint on that. These have got a cap on and the actual line runs right through the inside of the body. So it's an anti-tangle rig. With this float you can get tangled because the side eye is down from the actual cap. You can get tangled over the top of the actual float. With the inline one it's very difficult to get tangled because the line comes right out of the centre of the cap, the plastic cap on the top of the float. These caps are fluorescent in colour, so they're very visible even at distance. And of course, the top is much thicker than the original type dibber that we produce. So they're ideal for fishing with bigger pellets. Pellets like 8s or even 11 mil size pellets can be supported easily with this type of float. Even this one, this is just a 0.2 gram that I'm using. The fish are quite tentative today, so I've elected to fish with quite a small float. Now these inline dibbers are in 3 sizes. They're 0.2, 0.4 and 0.6 gram, and you can see they've all got different coloured tops. So you can select the top that you want to see on any given day. The yellow one stands out like a thumb with the black background that I've got. Now just to explain what actually happens, because the line runs through the centre of the float, it's fastened on the line. I've just got an 018 Supplex main line, and then I've put 2 rubbers at the base of the float that holds the float in place. Because the line runs through the body, you can still move the float on the line pretty easily. But what they are ideal for, the water at Bonehill Mill today is quite clear, and although the fish are coming shallow, they're spooking away all the time. So when you're actually fishing, you're trying to flick to the fish rather than slapping the rig all the time. These floats, with them being clear, are not as obtrusive to the fish, so the fish can't see them the same as what you would if you had a solid float on. They are terrific floats for fishing shallow, especially with bigger baits. But you could also use them for fishing down the margins as well. When you're wanting to use bigger baits like worms on the hook, 2 big dendrobinas, or even 2 and 3 pieces of corn, right? The cap of the float, because it's much bigger than the original one, will support a big bait. If you look at the 0.6 gram, you can imagine that once you've shotted that to the cap, then even with 2 pieces of worm on, or 2 full dendrobinas even, that float will support the bait. Now looking at the rig that I'm using today, it's important when you're fishing shallow is to use a band on the hook that is actually below the pellet. And just to explain that, I'll just put a pellet in the band. Right, I'm just using 8 mil pellets that I'm feeding as well, and you can see that the actual pellet is about 5 or 6 mil below the actual hook. I'm just fishing with an 016 Supplex hook length, and say what I've said, an 18 or even a 20 main line. because that main line is away from the fish, it's not going to cause any problems. Now you can imagine when you're fishing for fish that's right on the surface, these floats are brilliant because they can hardly be seen. And I've set a rig up today to actually fish for fish that are moving about on the surface. I've got one with a much longer line. You can see on that rig I've probably got nearly 5 foot of line, and that's an ideal rig for flicking to fish. I've got a slightly bigger float. I've got the 0.4 size float, and you can see it takes, I think I've got 4 number 8s on that. So using an 8mm pellet, and I can actually sit here and watch for any fish that's moving around and swing to them fish. A brilliant way of fishing, and there's been a lot of big weights caught fishing like this. I'm just going to try and keep feeding and just see if I can catch another one out shallow while I'm talking to you. Now these rigs, these floats are not only for fishing shallow, you can use them down the margins as well where you're fishing with big baits. So they're not just a float just for shallow fishing. You can use them for other means of catching fish as well. Even this 0.2 size float supports an 8mm pellet very well. You'd think that the In-Line Crystal Dibbers are quite easy to manufacture, but they're actually quite difficult, and we had a lot of problems with them getting them so that they were watertight. But eventually we cracked it so that the floats now don't let water in. They sit there on the surface perfectly. You can lift and drop or even slap with these type of floats and catch fish shallow. The main thing when you're fishing shallow is to keep feeding, and alright, I've been talking to you for a while and I've stopped feeding. But you've got to keep feeding all the time, because these fish, if you just back off the feed, even when you've hooked a fish, it's better to try and feed while you're playing with the fish. And if you just back off on the feed, the fish will go out of your peg. And that's another fish hooked on the In-Line Crystal Dibber. I think it's a big fish to round off as well, which is nice.